Welcome in. This is Grayson Grundhoefer. I'm here with Travis Roeder, and today we are going to be breaking down Baylor's roster by position group. We're going to go through every position, talk about kind of what we see from the guys who could be starters, the younger guys. We're going to try to talk about almost everyone for at least a little bit, just to try to give our thoughts about kind of where they're at in their progression and maybe who they were as recruits coming in as well. We're not going to so much talk about the new guys coming in the 2023 class yet, but we will talk about the guys who enrolled, obviously, in the summer. So I guess, Travis, we're going to start with quarterback. That's kind of where we're going to open up the conversation, and Gary Bohannon's gone. So Baylor's got a new starting quarterback, and that will be Blake Shapen, who we got to see a little bit during the spring. Kind of what is your overall view of the quarterback position now that they have Kyron Drones, they added Luke Anthony, and now Blake Shapen is there along with a few walk-ons?
Yeah, I think it's a good room. And just before I quickly get started, I'm excited to do this because whenever I do interviews or podcasts or anything like that, Grayson, the tension is tough between like wanting to dive super duper deep and keeping it general. And I think this podcast, we can just if we want to talk for 7 minutes about the backup left guard, let's do it.
Yeah, let's rant.
Yeah. So with the quarterbacks, I think Blake is obviously a very solid at this point. What is his ceiling? I think that's kind of an interesting question I wanted to ask you. What if everything goes right for him this year, what does that look like for you?
If everything goes right,
yeah.
This is
okay. Not literally to the 100th percentile, but
right.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. So I think a year from now, you could look at Blake Shapen and go, I think there's a chance he has a year similar to what Russell Wilson did at Wisconsin.
Okay.
And he kind of profiles as Russell Wilson. The deep ball threat is something that Russ has taken with him to the NFL. Just a great deep ball passer, but also very accurate. And those are two things that I do see with Shapen. I think for this year specifically, his first year as a starter, it's going to be a little different. I think he'll have really high highs and maybe a few lows. You know what I mean? Games where he's just not as efficient. And I think we saw last year, he was so good in first halves because those are usually schemed a little bit more by the coaching staff. And then the second halves, he just wasn't as strong. Yeah. And so I feel like we're going to see some of that. So my reasonable expectation, I posted this online, I think that he could throw for around 3,400 yards this year.
What did Gary throw for last year?
Gary threw for 20. Do I have it right in front of me?
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. He only threw for 2,200 yards.
Okay, so that's a major step up.
Major step up. I think he can get around 3,200. That was in 12 games, though, with Gary. So it probably would have been more like 2,600 yards. Because if you add Shapen, they were almost at 2,800 passing yards. Yeah. So, and then I think the touchdowns can probably be around 28, 29. So I guess reasonable is probably 3,000.
I like that. I like that Russell Wilson comp, not necessarily for how each of the. I don't think they move similarly or throw the ball similarly, but right. I think what you're getting at is they're playing behind an offense that's going to run the ball 45 or 50 times a game.
Play action.
It's play action. It's a lot of kind of clear levels concepts, rollouts. He's going to be good on the move, and I think when Baylor plays Texas, I want Shapen to only throw the ball 25 times. That number is probably going to creep up a little bit more.
It is.
But yeah, definitely. But obviously that's if everything is going well. And I think in the games where he looks his absolute best, it's because Tay and Squirrel have 250 combined between them. And then, Blake's only throwing 20 to 30 times. I do worry about the downside. I think there's kind of two clear weaknesses for him for me. And I don't mean to start with the weaknesses. I just think we've talked about his strengths a lot.
Yeah.
And people have talked about his strengths a lot, which is, the touch, the accuracy, the moxie on the move, the toughness. But out of high school, he was a guy who was very willing to kind of be that gunslinger. And Aranda has used that word to describe him as well. He's a gunslinger. He was willing to kind of press the ball, throw it into coverage, let his guys make a play, which is something that Gary really wasn't willing to do last year. And that's kind of you're balancing on a knife's edge for how aggressive you get with the ball versus protecting the ball. And so he's a guy where I think you might see a few more interceptions, but you're going to see also probably a lot more big plays and a lot more opportunities for wide receivers to make plays downfield. And the other thing is just, and it's, again, I've talked about this, how frustrating it is to talk about potential for injury. How do you quantify that? But he's obviously a small guy. And Baylor ran their quarterback a ton last year. They're not going to do it nearly as much this year, but in the biggest games, your quarterback has to be a threat to run with the ball. And Blake's a really good scrambler. I just hope that they're really doing those sliding drills for him in practice, because let him get his 7 yards, but you don't need to fight for the extra yard or two when you got a big linebacker or safety coming after you. So those are kind of the two things that I'll be watching to see, how aggressive is he with the ball? And if he can limit his interceptions to less than 10 this year, I think that portends very, very well. And I think the likelihood of that is decent.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd put the over-under right at 10. I think he's probably going to throw for, that is a great number. Yeah. I think he'll probably be around 30 to 10, 28 to 10. And you got to remember, last year, as much as we like to say Gary took care of the football, Gary didn't take chances, his touchdown to interception was 18 to 7.
Right. He had, so I'm trying to remember of all those interceptions, probably at least 4 or 5 of those were just he totally misread the coverage and just threw the ball right into him. So I think there'll be different styles of interceptions to where you'll see Blake, he knows it's double coverage and he tries to fire that ball in there, whereas Gary was just misreading the defense. So I guess it doesn't really matter how the interception happens. If it happens, it happens. But I think that will be something to watch where you're does Shapen understand the situation for when he can take those chances versus when he can't?
Right. And I will say, I think the running part matters more in the red zone. Mm-hmm. That's where Gary really thrived. If you look at the overall body of work, Gary only had 323 yards rushing. It wasn't crazy, and it took him about, I'd say it was the 5th or 6th game. Really, the Oklahoma game is where he just straight up, we're going to run you, and you're going to make plays more in the run game. So Shapen is going to have to figure out ways to make up for that in the red zone, the tough yards, because defenses are going to game plan to shut down Squirrel and Tay in the red zone. So he's going to have to make the proper reads and the proper throws. And I think that's where having great tight ends is going to play a huge role in kind of how they scheme things. We saw that in the spring game. Dabney, he's a big red zone threat, and of course Ben Sims.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with Ron Roberts, and he was talking about that around the 13 or 14-year-old line is where most offenses, there's a very clear change in their playbook, because you can't run your same offense, down the field as you can, in that tight red zone. And last year for Gary, it was very clear they would run some quarterback power game, they'd run some quarterback stretch, and a few kind of simple passing concepts. Quarterback power, quarterback stretch are not going to be Blake's game in the red zone. And so, like you said, it's going to be about, I think about that touchdown he had to Ben Sims in the Tech game last year, critical third. It was 3rd and 10 from the 10-yard line. Baylor had to have that score because Tech was breathing down their neck, and they threw a double move to Ben Sims where Blake had a ball that, Gary can make that throw, but I feel a lot more confident with Shapen making that throw. So I think it's going to be about touch throws. When you think about the back-to-back touchdowns he had to Josh Cameron in the spring game, which are touch accurate throws in the corner of the end zone, that'll be interesting to watch. But, speaking to your running point, I think we can move on to the next guy on the list, Kyron Drones.
Yep.
Gary wasn't actually – I was very disappointed in his running instincts and running ability. Extremely powerful, incredible athlete. And when he planted his foot in the ground and got upfield, it just looked amazing. But didn't have great running instincts. And you see that running back too. Kyron's actually a better runner than Gary is. I've been told by multiple guys on the staff that he might not have the pure athleticism of Gary, but he has better instincts. And so I think when I look at this quarterback room and the final guy on the list is Luke Anthony, I do expect that Kyron is the second option, especially if it's for just a couple series or two to where it's Blake gets banged up, he heads to the locker room, they're not sure. You just stick Kyron in there, and I think they're going to have some very clear game planned running options for Kyron. Not that Kyron is only a running option, but I think the offense will look a lot more like Gary, where it's play action, deep shots, rollouts, and then they're going to run some more power run game with Kyron. And I feel really good about this room as long as Shapen is healthy for at least 8 or 9 games. Depending on the timing, obviously you don't want to have to start Kyron against a Texas or a Kansas State or something like that. But I feel pretty good about this room if they have to get a spot start for 2 or 3 games this year. But I think once you get beyond that, I think guys like Kyron and I think Luke Anthony can keep the ball rolling, but they don't give you that offensive upside that Baylor needs to use in the biggest moments this year.
So you do feel like Kyron is the true backup? You don't think they'd lean more towards leadership and veteran? I mean, Luke Anthony's played a lot of games.
I think it would depend, like I said, on the manner and the timing of the injury. So I think if Blake gets hurt in the second game of the year and it's looking like he's going to be out for a long time, that would be more where I look towards a Luke Anthony, where they're like, we need somebody to lead for the whole season. And, we're going to run Kyron a lot. So does it make sense to run a guy as a that you're worried about getting hurt for a third guy again? So I don't know if that makes sense. So I guess I expect it more to be if it looks like it's just a drive or two or a half or two or maybe just a game, go with the Kyron Drones experiment, see what he's got. But if it's going to be a full season thing, it's nice to have all that experience from somebody like Luke Anthony.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fall as well. I think Luke was such a big pickup that I don't think people quite realize because he's a walk-on technically. But he was Conference USA Newcomer of the Year in 2020, just got hurt, and so he didn't play last year.
I mean, he's exactly what a lot of these very good quarterbacks that play at FCS and or G5 schools look like, which is he's maybe 6 flat. He's not very athletic. He's not a statue, but he's more like a Bryce Petty versus some of these other guys. And his arm strength, he probably can throw 50 yards is about his give or take max. So he's not going to threaten the whole field, but he's accurate. He's confident. He knows what he's doing. And I feel relatively confident that if he was starting for Baylor, their ceiling would be a significantly lower, but I would feel pretty good about them getting to that 21 to 28 point range every game,
and making a bowl,
which is a massive difference that, a nice luxury that somebody like Oklahoma would not have.
For sure.